I'm excited that both Jon and Mike are here today to talk to us a little bit about wildfire and wildfire concern here in the East Bay, particularly kind of in this area that I'll let them talk about, but that kind of touches on that Moraga, Lafayette, Berkeley Hills area where we often hear about wildfire concern. Jon Kaufman is the president of the Claremont Canyon Conservancy, a 500-member organization in the Berkeley-Oakland area of the East Bay Hills. This organization works to protect and enhance the natural beauty of the Claremont Canyon, the largest remaining open space on the western slope of the East Bay Hills. For the past 3 years, he's also co-chaired this effort to build a joint powers agency that has now been turned into an effort to create a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, among the cities, 2 counties, and fire districts in the high fire risk zone of the East Bay Hills to prevent wildfires. So we're excited to hear from Jon about that effort. And then after we hear from Jon, we're going to introduce Mike Ramir. He is the Moraga Orinda Fire District Division 4 Director. So I will do a little bit more of an introduction of Mike after we hear from Jon. But thank you both for being here today. Our hope is just to sort of hear from them about some of the efforts. Mike did bring a few slides, and then just open it up for question and answer, have a bit of a conversation this morning so that we can better understand what's happening here in the East Bay to address these issues. We felt this was particularly timely as there's been so much in the news recently about folks no longer being able to access the same amount of insurance and how insurance companies are thinking about this. So if Mike or Jon, either of you have any ability to address that or share your thoughts, we'd love to hear them. And Jon, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Well, Lindy, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm glad to be here and meet so many people. I see a couple familiar faces. Dave Requa, I think I knew when I was a public affairs consultant years ago. So some familiar faces as well. So our work I want to focus on the work that we're doing to build a wildfire prevention coordinating group in the East Bay Hills. And our thoughts about that really began in the aftermath of the 91 fire. We realized that the fire was really blown by embers from eucalyptus trees that might have been literally thousands of feet away from where the fire was. And the concern is that a city can do a terrific job of preventing wildfire by removing invasive vegetation in its own area. And a good example of that you'll hear from our next speaker, where they've done a terrific job in the Moraga Orinda Fire District on wildfire prevention and removing vegetation. But the problem is that wildfire doesn't know county or city lines. It goes wherever the wind and the fuel take it. So our concern is how to do on the prevention side what the fire departments do so well on the firefighting side. And during the 91 fire, there were all kinds of equipment coming from all over the Greater Bay Area to extinguish the fire in the area where I live. There was a fire truck from San Leandro parked in front of my house in Berkeley-Oakland during the fire. And when we came back the next day, the fire truck was still there. So we appreciated the coordination that the fire departments do on the extinguishing side. But the prevention side wasn't as vital. It wasn't moving as forward as well. Some cities do a terrific job, other cities don't. And it's partly money and partly just coordination. So a group of us on the citizen side began thinking 3 years ago about how to build a coordinated effort. We thought at first that a joint powers agency would be a good model for us, and we began with that in mind. We brought together citizens groups, and then demonstrating our interest, public officials became interested, and we got a group of public officials together. Out of that came the idea of a working group of 7 different public agencies on the East Bay Hills They were the two counties, the Alameda County, Contra Costa County, the city of Berkeley, and the city of Oakland and Alameda County, and the cities of Richmond and Pinole in Contra Costa County, and the Orinda Moraga Fire District. And those 7 agencies have been working for almost 2 years now on putting together a memorandum of understanding, thinking that that would be sufficient rather than creating a joint powers agency. And I'm pleased to announce that we now have a memorandum of understanding that the 7 agencies have signed off on. And we are going to be presenting it actually later this week to a larger group of public agencies in the East Bay Hills. There are something like 20 some public agencies in what CAL FIRE has described as the high-risk zone in the East Bay Hills. And we're hoping that those agencies will take a look at the MOU and by this fall, maybe have signed off on it so that we'll actually have in place a coordinating mechanism. We've been looking at what's going on now in Marin County, where they have actually a JPA. That's a lot easier over there because it's all in one county. So it becomes easier to conceive of and easier to coordinate and easier to fund, because they also passed a ballot measure to create funding for their JPA. So they're in a position of being able to actually do work of removing vegetation and educating the public about doing the same on their own properties. So we're looking at that work that's going on in Marin as a model, and we're looking forward to being able to get the MOU going and perhaps create some funding to do work. Some cities are able to do more than others, and the problem again is that wildfire doesn't stop at city lines. So the cities that haven't been able to fund efforts create a problem that goes beyond their own city lines, and that's the issue that we want to address. So I'll stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jon.
Yeah, I didn't mention, I want to mention one other thing. It's taken some funding to get where we are. We've hired a consultant to run the meetings and build a consensus. And we've hired an attorney who's a member of your leadership council to actually draft the MOU. So we were pleased to get some funding, including we received $10,000 from the Auto Club Insurance Division, which is a member of your organization. So we're very pleased to have that contribution.
Hey, Lindy.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
So what are the what is the actual authorities of drafted in the MOU? So what is this group going to do? And so what authority will they have to do it?
Well, they will decide. The MOU is pretty open. It doesn't describe exactly what they will do, but I think, and that's the next big step, is for them to decide that they really need to share ideas, but also put together a program, a wildfire prevention program. So you're asking the question that they'll have to be grappling with once they form the MOU.
John, this is Mike Romer. I'm wondering, has the Oakland Fire Department contributed money to your organization? And if so, how much? And also, what kind of buy-in are they doing in terms of upgrading their code enforcement standards?
Yeah, I can't speak to the code issues, but yes, the 7 agencies that I mentioned have all contributed to our fund, which is currently being managed by the Oakland Fire Safe Council until such time as the MOU is in place and they establish their own funding mechanism and coordination.
John, this is Dave Requa. Got a question for you.
Yeah,
It's been a long time since we've talked.
yes.
Yeah, you didn't mention anything about the East Bay Regional Park District. Have they gotten into the discussion at all? Because they have some lands in that area.
Yeah, the East Bay Park District is probably the biggest agency that we need to work with, and we are coordinating with them. They were not part of the 7 agencies that were our working group or steering committee, but we're in touch with them, and now that we've gotten the MOU drafted, we're hoping that they will sign on to it. In the immediate area where I live, the public agencies with the most public land are the Park District, East Bay Mud, and the university. The university probably will not join because it's a state agency and they have their own concerns about that and their own legal issues. But we're hoping that the Park District and East Bay Mud will participate. And we've been in touch with them all along.
Thanks, Dave. And sorry
Thank
about
you.
missing your hand. Sometimes it's hard
That's
to
okay.
keep track of where the questions are coming from. Did that answer your question though, Dave?
Yes, it did. You know, I'll ask the Bob Whitley question though that he didn't ask this time. Is there anything the task force can do to help this along? You know, we might be able to help twist East Bay Mud's arm a little bit.
That would be good. One of the issues is getting everybody on the same page and working together, and arm twisting or herding cats. Those are the operative concerns. And so if you're able to do that, that would be great. We have a good relationship with some of the board members of the Park District, and staff has been watching and observing as well.
We actually have a East Bay Regional Park board member as one of our newest board members coming online. He will be installed as part of our new board at our installation event, which comes up in August. So certainly an opportunity for us to engage with him. And I'm happy to send this message forward on behalf of the East Bay Leadership Council to him. And John, we can also talk a little bit more after this meeting about maybe who you've had more success versus less success being able to coordinate with.
Great. Thank
I
you.
see Antonio raised his hand. Antonio, do you want to chime in here as a board member?
Yes, John, what role do you see East Bay Mud playing as a water district in this group?
Well, they own a great deal of land. They've begun to remove some vegetation in our area, and we hope they'll continue to do that. They've got a limited amount of resources and staff, but they are moving forward, and we hope they'll be an active participant. So they're certainly an example of what should be done. They've removed a good deal of eucalyptus trees in their property just above Grizzly Peak Boulevard, for example, and it's now a beautiful area with lots of flowers. Hopefully not fire. So I'm looking forward to their participation, and we've been in touch with their staff and some of their board members actually too.
When it comes to firefighting responsibilities during a wildfire, is there any expectation for a water district to supply water for wildfire fighting?
I can't answer that question. We've been on the prevention side, so I can't really address that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So this is Bob Whitley again, another follow-up question. So you've got a group of 7 who've signed on to this. So how is that going to be? Is there a lead agency? Who's going to handle the administrative and aspects? But rather than a group of 7 just getting around the table and talking, what's the plan to do that?
Well, the MOU specifies that everyone who signs on to the MOU will have a vote on how the agency, or how it's not an agency, but how the coordination works. And that's to be determined as to who the lead agency will be, who the bookkeeper will be.
Who do you think it will be?
I don't know.
John, can I ask, so, I mean, turn the conversation a little bit here, but just to clarify, so this is all about prevention, right?
Right.
Do some of these agencies already do prevention work, and is part of this about like helping to inform and kind of education and knowledge share about the best ways and best practices in that regard? Or is it more about like manpower?
Well, it's certainly about the former. It's certainly about coordination and education. Mike will talk about what his agency is doing, and that's probably a good example of what should be done by other agencies. So we're hoping that the MOU will enable more communication and coordination, but it needs to go beyond that. Clearly, money is needed, and there's state money, there's federal money. And one of the things that I see the MOU doing is raising money, writing proposals, and then the MOU can actually have some resources to spend on vegetation management, for example.
Got it. So part of the thought here is that by coming together under one kind of umbrella, that umbrella being this MOU and hopefully one name, via that MOU, they can apply for like state and federal grant money that might allow them to distribute those funds.
Yeah, exactly. And having everyone work together, I think, would be an attractive target for funding agencies to look at.
Right. Always an appeal. I mean, we deal with that a lot in our other task forces, right? The more folks you're able to kind of put under the umbrella, oftentimes, the better. I am curious though, have you heard any pushback from organizations who are maybe concerned that by joining this, they might not be able to access those dollars as an individual district or organization, or are most folks pretty receptive?
No, I think folks are receptive, especially the smaller agencies that don't have the capacity to do stuff on their own. There is some concern that we're doing a good, a larger agency might say, we're doing a good job, we don't need you. So there is that feeling, but hopefully we'll overcome that as we move forward.
And what about CAL FIRE? Have you engaged with them at all, just in regards to kind of getting their seal of approval, and as they're doing, because they're releasing new draft maps, right? Is that correct?
Right. They're drafting new maps that will redefine the high-risk zones. But CAL FIRE is, as an agency, is more focused on the areas of outside cities. They're more concerned with rural areas, and so we need to look at them as a funding source, I think, more than as an active day-to-day participant.
Got it. That makes sense. I will say, just for our EBLC members, this actually came up in our housing task force last week. So it was very timely that we were having a meeting following that, because our housing folks were talking about how these draft maps in the high severity zones interact with the ability for cities to zone for and build housing in certain areas. And that as that changes and shifts, it can impact the ability to build in some spaces. One of the things that was also brought up, though, and I'm curious, Mike and John, if either of you have had any conversations about this, is that there are also circumstances in which building can actually reduce fire risk. Because, and not often, but in certain circumstances, by building roads and putting in buildings, there's some mitigation that occurs. Is that anything that you all have heard or seen at all? Yeah, usually dealing with open space, so that makes sense.
We got a couple of $1 million grant to several years ago to build what we call the North Orinda shaded fuel break, which is not a building per se, but basically it's an effort along the entire northern edge of Orinda, part of Lafayette and part of the Tilden Park area, to create a fuel break, by not taking down the trees themselves, but by reducing the fuel load in the understory. And, you know, we were able to engage the services of a number of contractors to basically clear that out. So if you're familiar with Wildcat Canyon Road between Inspiration Point and San Pablo Dam Road, and then Bear Creek Road all along the border between Northern Orinda and Briones Reservoir, and then actually into the northern section of Briones near Lafayette. That area is all, that understory over the period of about 1.5 years was all cleared out. And the theory is that the most likely place that a ember-driven firestorm is going to enter the Orinda area is by a series of Diablo winds from the north and the east. And there's 2 ways for a fire to propagate. It's the flame front itself, but more likely, as John mentioned earlier, it's by the disbursement of embers. And those embers can be dispersed, particularly during a Diablo wind event, for miles. And so it's a combination of establishing kind of a fire Maginot line across the North Orinda shaded fuel break, but also by very, very rigorous enforcement of rigorous fire codes in your community itself. You know, I can talk about that a little bit later, but you know, hardening homes is also a form of a building that that reduces the possibility of embers igniting any one particular parcel. And the enforcement that we're doing in our district is intended to reduce the fuel loads parcel by parcel through a series of, you know, incentives, education, and ultimately enforcement and abatement or citations if people are unwilling to do the work that needs to be done.
Well, that sounds like kind of a good segue actually into kind of what you all are doing specifically, but I just want to wrap it up with Jon and say thank you, Jon, for giving us that information and helping to lead this effort. For those of you who are interested, there is a website, it was included in the announcement, but I'll also drop it in the chat to kind of follow this work. Oh, Dave just raised his hand. Dave, did you have a last question for Jon?
I do. Thanks, Lindy. Hey, Mike, great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. And Jon, that was really interesting presentation. I just had a question and an idea. Jon, I'm wondering if you're aware that right now there are 2 bills, at one Assembly Bill 1567 and the other Senate Bill 867. Both are proposed bond measures. Both have wildfire prevention and resilience in their titles, and they're both scheduled or proposed at about a $15 billion level. I'm wondering if there might be a overlap between wildfire prevention and water quality in the watersheds, Mike, for you as well, but certainly wondering if East Bay Mud being involved could help in terms of a multi-benefit project, which would involve managing invasive species and other fire-related issues, along with water quality improvement in the watershed. That might be a potential funding source. Obviously, a little more complicated than just getting direct grants from CAL FIRE.
Thank you for mentioning that. We'll look into that and pursue that.
Good to think outside the box, though. Thank you, Dave. And certainly, as we see these bonds potentially shape up, it's good to pay attention to what's in them and how they're being worded. So I appreciate that reminder too, Dave. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Jon. I'm going to introduce Mike, if that's a-okay. Mike Romere is a Moraga. Thank you.
Roaming around the wilderness to prevent fires, right?
There you go. See, you must have been very good at running for office. Mike is a retired prosecutor, having served as an Alameda County District Deputy Attorney in its homicide, sexual assault, gang, and environmental units. He's also served on the board of directors of a Delta Area Community Agricultural Bank. He earned a BA degree from the University of California, Santa Cruz, just like me, go Slugs, and a JD from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. Mike was elected to the MOFD board in 2022. He's also completed training as a community emergency response team volunteer, GoCERT, and a La Miranda area radio interest group radio operator, and Moraga Orinda Fire District Communications Support Team volunteer. So he was very involved in the district even before he was elected, which makes a lot of sense. He's also an associate member of the American Geophysical Union and its Natural Hazards section, and has a special interest in prevention, planning, and response to natural disasters and evacuation strategies. So thank you for being here, Mike. And he does have some slides. So Mike, I've already made you a co-host, and if you can try to share your screen with us.
I could, but that's going to take up time. I'm wondering whether I know that from personal experience that Dave Richardson probably doesn't need to see the slides, and I'm guessing that most others don't either. So I might just use up the time to explain a little bit about my background. Thank you, Lindy. That's all true. One of the things I also want to emphasize is during my 30-year career as a prosecutor, prosecuting gang members for murder and rape and carjacking and all these other things, is that me and my family are great lovers of the outdoors. As you can see from the background here, this is Jenny Lake in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, where we love to come. We've been backpackers and adventure travelers. My wife's in the adventure travel industry, and we started our kids backpacking when they were 5 and 6 years old, just north of this location here. And one of the reasons for that is that that's a good way to recharge your batteries when you're trying cases for people doing the most horrible things to each other in a trial court. But the other thing is that my entire family has a great love of nature and the natural environment. One of my last assignments in the district attorney's office was in the Environment and Consumer Affairs Division, prosecuting polluters. After I retired, I signed up with a number of local organizations, including 350.org and Contra Costa County Climate Leaders, to join a group of locals from San Francisco, the Bay Area, and statewide to advocate for measures before the Assembly and the Senate to mitigate the effects of climate change. 6 years ago, as I realized that those efforts have probably not been fast and effective enough, I signed up with the Moraga Orinda Fire District Communications Support Team to act as a volunteer to support firefighters in emergency radio communications and other efforts to deal with the disasters that I think are becoming more and more frequent and more inevitable in our future. And as part of those efforts, I started participating and supporting the firefighters in prescribed burns, which I have found absolutely and utterly fascinating. Part of that is that I suppose I have more of a fascination with fire on the ground than maybe I should. But also, it's important to realize that prescribed burning has been a tradition in our state literally for thousands of years. One of the prescribed burns that I supported was up in the Alhambra area of the Briones National Park. And among the crews that volunteered was a crew of indigenous native folks who were obviously very proud, gratified to be included in our crews, but also which I realized that we ought to be indebted to them for their 1,000-year history of knowledge of the community in which our forests basically naturally burned. And the indigenous people set fires to those areas for a variety of reasons, one of which was to create new native growth for the deer and the turkeys and the other things that they hunted, but also to manage the environment and to the smaller fires that burn the underbrush create the more devastating canopy fires that really affect the ecosystem at large. So as I was doing more and more of these prescribed burns and volunteering with the fire department and communications and evacuation strategies, a group of locals prevailed upon me to run for the office of board of directors. We have a 5-member board that are staggered every 2 years. Three were elected in the last November election, and I was privileged to be one of them. So I took office in December, and I have been participating in the board for the last 6 months. As I stated, 5 years ago, I think that we had about 142 inspections and enforcements. As Chief Dave Winokur, who in my opinion is probably one of the premier fire chiefs in the country, if not the world, has ramped that up. We now have 6 full-time fire enforcement personnel headed by Gordon Graham. And I think we're on track last year and this year to do 4,000 inspections. We have instituted what I believe to be the most strict fire code in the state. We also prevailed upon our adjacent agency, the Contra Costa County Fire Agency, known as Con Fire, to also enact the strict enforcement code. And in a nutshell, that provides for a number of things. A 5 feet clear zone from the foundation of the home, a 30-foot zone, and a 100-foot zone that all have different standards, but which essentially follow the guidance that if you harden your home, that is, if you prevent embers from catching fire and igniting the understory of your eaves or your gutters by vent protections and gutter protections and defensible spaces, that you prevent your own home from catching fire from the embers, but you also protect your adjacent neighbors by depriving the neighbor's property of the explosive fuel of your own home going up in flames. And I think something like 85 to 95% of Arendans are very enthusiastic and cooperative about doing that. It can be very, very expensive. I've had neighbors that have told me that they've spent $20,000 removing trees, installing vents, installing gutter guards, hardening their homes, adhering to these 5, 30, and 100-foot standards, including my friend and neighbor, Dave and Casey Richardson live, about 3 houses away from me. A year ago, I arranged for our chipper program, which is you get 6 people together in your neighborhood, and the Moraga-Orinda Fire District, in conjunction with the Orinda City Council, has bought a chipper. And you schedule the chipper to come out to your community, and each of your 6 or 7, I think in our cases, it was about 7 or 8 neighbors, including the Richardsons. And it happened to be that we had one contractor who we jointly talked to. And I think that he did several $1,000s worth of work for Dave and Casey, for Julie and I, and for 6 of our neighbors. But we were able to negotiate a rate that was probably 50% what they would have charged, because we didn't have to pay for them to take the stuff away that the chipper program did. So it's a combination of private effort at private expense with a shared community effort at community expense. And I think the result was that Dave and Casey's house is a lot more safe for them, but also our home is safer for us. And both of our homes are less likely to be involved in a conflagration because of the efforts of the 7 or 8 people, 7 or 8 homes and families that are immediately between Dave and Casey's home and across the street from both of us. So when you start getting those efforts at the community level, and then we also have Mark Evans, who has spearheaded an effort to establish the Orinda Firewise Council. And Mark has also just recently in the last week qualified that as a 501c3 organization. And the key thing about getting a 501c3 designation is that they are now able to accept both private, state, and federal grant money. So we're hopeful that the Orinda Firewise Council has already been a spearhead organization for a number of neighborhood firewise groups. For example, Dave and Casey and Julie and I are all in a Glorieta Firewise community. So there's I think that's up to about 100 homes on Overhill and Tara and Martha that have signed up, pledged to, do a minimum amount of work to firescape our properties. And, we get a collective benefit by doing so. I think it's also a great argument to use for your homeowner's insurance company that is talking about canceling you or doubling or tripling your rates to say, hey, here's what we've done. We've individually and collectively hardened our homes. We have gutter guards. We have the 1/16 inch steel mesh that's covering all of our foundation vents. So those embers aren't coming through the vents and igniting the insulation underneath our homes and causing a situation where when the firefighters see a home that's already been ignited from the insulation that's underneath the home, they can't do anything. The home is gone. But if you can prevent those embers from getting in the vents and touching that insulation, and if you, with gutter guards, you can prevent those embers from igniting leaves in the gutters and igniting the roof coverings on fire. Those embers can be literally hitting your home. They're traveling from Briones, 3 miles away. They can be hitting the gutters and hitting those vents, dropping into the gravel that's 5 feet from your home, and your home does not ignite. Obviously for a whole lot of reasons. So, just basically, so one of the things I'm really concerned about is the effect of climate on ongoing risks. And I think the folks who are really looking at this thing very, very carefully are the reinsurance companies. I think all of you are probably familiar enough with the insurance industry to know that State Farm and Allstate cannot write insurance policies unless they are protected from a catastrophic loss by an insurance policy with another company, such as Berkshire Hathaway and Munich Re and Swiss Re. All write reinsurance policies to provide for reimbursement for catastrophic risks. But those underwriters are all looking at things like, the carbon dioxide levels worldwide. They're looking at the sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic that have been exploding in the last couple of months. And what they're doing is that they are raising rates. And when they raise rates, then State Farm and Allstate either make a decision that they have to raise rates if they can, or if they can't, they stop writing new insurance policies. And this is a trend which really, really concerns me, because as you can tell, if folks are having to spend $10,000 a year or more on insurance policies, it's going to affect their home property values. It's going to affect their ability to be able to buy and sell real estate. I mean, eventually, at some level, it affects our tax base as well. So, I mean, I've gone on a long time. I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, But I do want to express appreciation for Dave for inviting me here, but even more so, I want to express appreciation for him and Casey being great partners and neighbors in hardening their homes at great personal expense, because that's what makes this community worth living in, and that's what makes my efforts to serve unpaid volunteer on a board of directors satisfying and rewarding to me. It's great to have neighbors like Dave and Casey, and it's great to live in a community where people are really making great efforts to protect the entire Bay Area by making our homes less susceptible to what I think is going to be an inevitable ember shower at some point in our next 20, 10, 5 years. So that's
Thank you,
where
Mike.
we are. I think we have a great community. We have a wonderful fire chief. We have some of the strictest code enforcement in the state. And you know, I hope I don't get thrown out of office when I advocate to make it even stricter than it is, because as John mentioned, I think it's not only invasive species. You know, I'd like to see the eucalyptus trees eliminated entirely from our community, but that's very, very expensive. I mean, the neighbors behind me, I think, you know, they've got 5 huge trees. It's probably, you know, costing them $25,000 to remove those trees. And, you know, when you have that kind of a challenge throughout an entire community, you got the Monterey pines, you got my Monterey pines are all gone, my eucalyptuses are all gone. But I know that there's other people in the community that still have those challenges. And, you know, you still see juniper around. You know, juniper has to be gone by the end of 2023, according to our most recent fire codes. But we have a lot of work to do. I think we've made great progress, but we can't rest until or unless we I don't think we can rest. I think ongoing
Not at all is the
thing.
answer to that.
It's gonna, you know, every year we're gonna have to do more.
Well, I have a few questions, but I want to open it
Sure.
to our attendees and just see if anyone else has questions. Did anything come up for anyone want to raise their hand or put anything in the chat? I'm glad to hear that Dave has been such a great neighbor and that you all were able to kind of come together in that effort. Okay, well, I'll let folks kind of think on it and ask my question. You kind of provided a great example there, right? Of like folks coming together with a public agency and kind of thinking creatively. You also highlighted that like education about what you can do to protect your home has been really impactful. I'm curious, you know, thinking about this MOU and thinking about kind of bringing organizations together, do you think that there is a large like public education effort on the horizon that, you know, could go outside of one district? And is that something that even this MOU could perhaps be involved in? I'm just thinking about how like some of the things you're talking about are not efforts I've heard of or am aware of, but seem very important. And particularly when there's access to perhaps some public funding or public resources like a chipper, you know, I know, for example, in parts of Contra Costa, there's been a lot of success with like the Contra Costa Water District's WaterWise program and saying like, hey, there's some public dollars to help you transform your front lawn into, you know, a front lawn that doesn't use as much water. And now we're not gonna be able to pay for maybe that whole thing, but there's a good amount of funds here to help you do that. If funds were available for folks to better protect their homes and, you know, protect their neighbors, harden, as you said, do you think that folks would take advantage of that? And do you think public education is what's limiting it? Or do you think it's mostly just cost?
Well, I think our public education efforts have been going on for as long as I've been volunteering with the department, and that's going on 6 years. I think it's always a challenge to extend the education efforts, but education is not enough. I think, you know, when I show or when the chief shows these series of slides to people, I think it's very effective. I think for some people, actually, it can also be a little overwhelming. Yeah, and their attitude is, this is, who do I get, where do I get the contractor? How do I do this? How much is this going to cost me? Is this, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000? In some of these large parcels, it's far more than that. So I think even in the face of education, I think some people can kind of end up with deer in the headlights, paralyzed. This is too much for me to do.
Right.
And, that's one example of what, Dave and I did a year ago is really helpful. Because when you get a flurry of activity in the neighbors and the Siemens and the Horns see what the Richardsons and the Romers are doing, and they say, hey, here's a contractor right on scene, and we're getting what, about a 50% discount here? Done. Let's all do it. But again, it's not enough, because the chief has told me that, in the last several years, the folks who have been educated and are willing and cooperative have done the work. And now we're reaching the point where, we have a certain amount, any community has a certain amount of absentee landlords who are less motivated to spend the money or do the work. They tend to think, well, let's just wait and see whether we get a notice of abatement or a citation, or how much that citation ends up costing us.
Right.
And they don't do the work. One of our biggest challenges is, these other agencies, is the East Bay Regional Park District that has, I don't know, thousands of acres, and, the Monterey pines and eucalyptus that have been there for decades. And, for one reason or another, either they're overwhelmed or they have other priorities. And, if we're going to try to prevent a firestorm spreading embers from Briones Park, we get a lot more bang for someone's buck by getting the East Bay Regional Parks to do their part in the job, so that, we reduce the volume and the power of the embers coming in. And, that's a big priority, and our chief has been trying to do that. And frankly, he's not getting the response from the East Bay Park District that I think that we're entitled to get. And at some point, there may have to be some political consequences to that. We elect the members of the East Bay Regional Park District, and, if we're not getting the bang for the taxes that we're paying, that maybe we need to replace some folks on those positions. I don't know,
Well, and recognizing they're not here, right? We can't.
Well, I recognize that. And I also want, I mentioned to Lindy and Dave before I came on board that I appreciate you inviting me. And I don't think I would have been invited unless I had won election and I was serving on the board, but I'm not speaking for the board. I'm speaking as a citizen. And, when I look at how to accomplish these purposes by the use of tax dollars and by the use of our votes, I'm speaking as a citizen and I'm not representing either MOFD or the board in saying that, or in any of my other comments. I mean, everybody understands that, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
I think Bob Whitley had a comment.
So, thank you, very informational. And going back to the subject of the MOU, not necessarily topics of which our professional background lends us any expertise. But as an individual, I lived through the horror of the 91 firestorm. And so remember it vividly. And it's definitely something that must be prevented again. So the MOU seems to be a way, along with the Mike's district, of trying to prevent such a horror happening ever again. To that extent, Dave Rico asked the question, what can East Bay Leadership Council do with this information? So, first of all, endorsing the efforts of the MOU and expanding the group, but also including the possibility of East Bay Leadership Council be a signature to that MOU, showing its support and activity. That's a big step, and I know that Lindy will probably cringe a little bit about one more thing to do, but as you know, members of the community, how do we endorse all of these different ideas of further prevention of from these firestorms? So that's my suggestion to the group.
Well, if I can respond, we would be delighted to have the Leadership Council listed as an endorsing agency. It would be an endorsement rather than a member, because an MOU by design is an agreement among public agencies, among the cities, the counties, and the fire districts. That's what the MOU would be. But if you look at our website, there is a whole list of individuals and organizations that have endorsed us, and we'd be very glad to have the Leadership Council listed there, and not only listed, but be helpful in reaching out to public agencies as you've indicated. That would be most helpful. We need to get cooperation, and Mike mentioned the issue between his district and the Park District. We want everybody to work together and cooperate, and we hope that the MOU will facilitate that.
Well, my suggestion on that is primarily engaged and seeing how well it's going, and to be basically on the inside of seeing how well it's going, rather than just being a recipient of every once in a while a presentation.
Great.
As long as this organization, as in the Water, Energy, and Environment Task Force, is
How
Oh, sorry, Bob. You think you were cutting out there for a second? I didn't know you were still talking. Please go ahead.
well, if there isn't going to be being on the inside, but what other mechanisms so that over time we're aware of and can participate in how well the communication system is working amongst all these different agencies.
I caught most of that. I think, Bob, what you were saying is that you want to just make sure the East Bay Leadership Council can be abreast of information about how we can be helpful in coordinating or helping to coordinate agencies. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it sounds like John's saying that us being an endorser would be helpful. And Jon also knows now of us and can kind of let us know how we can be helpful or lean on us if he thinks that's something we can do. Just by a nod of heads, those of you who are members of the East Bay Leadership Council, can you just show your support for us endorsing this? And if that is something you think we should do, looks like I'm seeing a thumbs up and a nodding of heads. I will bring that. Dave is raising his hand. I'm not sure if that's an endorsement or if he has a question, but I will bring this forward possibly to the board just so we can kind of ratify it, likely through consent, but it shouldn't be hugely problematic. I'll talk to Mark about it later today.
Thank you.
And Jon, one thing I'll offer my colleague Jackie Zipkin. Jackie is the GM, general manager of East Bay Dischargers Authority, and also has worked for a long time in the Bay Area leadership at East Bay Mud as well. That I think the Bay Area dischargers have I think it's a JPA, but a really effective way of operating with support from member agencies that provide the accounting services and that kind of thing. So she may be a resource to how an MOU can move to a JPA, can move to an organization that really takes advantage of the skill sets and resources of its members without an undue administrative burden on any one agency.
Thanks,
Great.
Dave. Yeah, I'm happy to help. EBDA is a JPA and we are members of the BACWA JPA. And so I've been developing a bit of a specialty in this area.
JPA Pro. Great suggestion there. Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. And with that, I'm happy to give everyone back a little more time this morning. But I did want to just again thank Mike and Jon for coming to talk to us. This is a task force where we actually hadn't really done a lot around fire and wildfire, but recognize that it's an important part of the environment and something that, you know, we'll certainly be talking about, I think, more and more, and particularly as there's potentially some climate bonds coming down the pipe. So we appreciate you helping to keep us informed and hope that we'll continue to have these conversations moving forward. And again, just appreciate you being here. Everyone that else was able to join us this morning, thank you for coming and spending some time with us this summer. We will be talking about hydrogen in July. We're hopefully going to bring in some companies that are doing some innovative work right here in the East Bay. So excited about that. Look for that announcement in the next few weeks. If you're interested in joining the planning team, send me an email. We're a great group and we're only growing, which has been really fun. So thank you for those of you who are part of that. And again, Mike and Jon, really appreciate you both being here today.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I enjoyed the presentations of Jon and your moderation, Lindy, and great seeing you again, Dave. And thank you for everyone for having me.
Yep. And thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.